So what I want to do is I want to go into a bit before we break for lunch. So we'll break for lunch in about half an hour or so. But I want to spend a bit of time today thinking about the stories that shaped getting us to where we are today, but also the stories of the people that we have shaped and helped along our journey. And one of the reasons why this is so important is because once we understand these stories, we can essentially recycle this content and use it time and time again. And this is one of the ways that we can clone ourselves as a business owner and magnify what we do, as I already said at the start of the day. And the stories, if we really understand the stories and what I call the story playbook, then not only do we allow ourselves to grow the business, but we allow our team to grow the business based on all the premises that we've brought to it at the start. And it's really important that we think about this principle of the fact that facts tell us what we should do, but stories sell. We've heard it said before, but it is so true. And I'm going to come back to why I believe that's true. But ultimately, if we get the stories right, then an inspiring story can genuinely change the world. It can change the way that people think. It can change the action that people take. And there's so many different ways that we can use stories in business, and there's certain principles as to what makes a good story. And so that's one of the places that I want to start. I want to start by telling you a story that I used to tell to quite a lot of clients, and it's a true story. So I met a new client a few years ago as part of when I was in Efficient Portfolio. And he was a pretty elderly guy, got lots of money. And I was chatting to him, and he said something to me, and he said, Charlie, life is arse about face. His words, not mine, but he said, life is arse about face. He said, years ago, I had a wife, I had children, but I didn't have the time to spend with them because I was busy in work and business. I had all of these amazing things I wanted to do with them, but I didn't have the time or the money to be able to actually do the things that we wanted to do. And he said, now I'm in, my later years, I've got all the time and the money that I need. I've got more than I'll ever need, except for the fact that my wife has long since left. My children live on the other side of the world. So now I've lost the opportunity to spend the time and the money with the people that I really would love to spend the time with. So he said, life is arse about face. When you have the time, you have the family and the relationships, you don't necessarily have the time or the money to enjoy with them. And he said, I really want to try and get, and it's one of the reasons why, what Ian and Sarah are doing in terms of creating that legacy during people's lifetimes, rather than waiting for the next generation to only receive the legacy once somebody's passed away. It's one of the reasons why that's so important. But that story is a story that I used to tell lots of my more elderly clients and also my younger clients. But typically those clients, as they went past retirement, it'd be a story that I would tell. But and the reason I would tell it is because it was just about trying to bring an awareness to how important it is that we create that legacy during our lifetime rather than once we've gone. And so I would tell that story to clients. I would tell it at seminars, I would tell it at webinars, I put it in the Life Legacy Gift book. And also what I would then find is that my team were telling this story. So the more we can pick up on stories that are going on within our business, the more we can allow these stories to kind of transcend the business across a multitude of different channels. Now, we talk about how stories sell, whereas facts tell. And one of the best examples I can give is I remember seeing a lady speak when I was at a conference I think it was in, I want to say Miami, but actually, no, it might have been Boston. And a lady called Kendra Hall, and she talked about storytelling. And she told us about some research that a team of people had done. And basically what they did was they went onto eBay and they found a load of items that they could buy for relatively small amounts. So the first one was a toy horse, and they paid $1 for this toy horse. And what they did was they then relisted that exact same toy horse on eBay, but with a story. So they told the story that this toy horse was that they were clearing out their daughter's bedroom, and this was the last toy that they were going to get rid of so that they could reuse this, and the meaning behind the horse. So they bought this horse for $1. They sold exactly the same horse a week later on eBay for $102, and all they did was add a story. They took another item, which was a globe paperweight. They paid $1.59 for that. And again, they added a story to it. This story was about how the paperweight had sat on her husband's desk. And now that they'd separated it, I can't remember exactly the story on that one, but it went from $1.59 purchase price to selling it for $197. In total, they paid $250 for a range of different things, and by adding stories to those items, they sold those items for $8,000, $250 to $8,000. Now, I came back from this conference in Boston, and I was like, right, girls, I told Fiona and Bronwyn, I've got this great idea. You're gonna told them the story about the toy horse and the globe paperweight, and I'm like, you can do this. So Bronwyn, my youngest, was like, right, I'll get on this. And she persuaded her granddad, my dad, that she should sell his old golf trolley. So she's writing up this story about granddad. I said, well, can I just read it before we hit, list? And her story was around the fact that granddad had died, and she was I'm really not sure, Bronwyn, that you can be putting that granddad has died when he's just literally given you this. So I'm not encouraging you to be disingenuous and tell lies about it. But what it does do is it shows the power of the story, and how a story can add so much more value to almost anything in our life. And I don't know if have any of you seen a TED Talk by Brian Stevenson? It's one of the most watched TED Talks out there, and basically he's a famous civil rights lawyer, but famous really as a result of his TED Talk. But basically, if you study the story of what or the structure of his talk, it's one of the most watched TED Talks of all time. It basically got him a standing ovation, and it's all around his grandmother telling him about telling him that he was unique. And so one of the things that if you read Carmine Gallo's book Talk Like TED, he actually breaks down what is the most successful structure of the most successful TED Talks. And essentially this concept of, and a TED Talk is usually around 18 minutes. So that 18 minutes should be three stories, followed by some statistics or facts, followed by a lesson. All of the most successful TED Talks are very much around that same structure. So a story, some facts, and then a takeaway lesson, and broken into 3 chunks. And that's a recurring thing that we're going to come back to. So one of the TED Talks I would encourage you to watch is this, Brian Stevenson, because you can watch it play out really clearly in his talk. So we really want to think about that structure when we're building stories. We want to create the story, then have the facts around what we can take from that. So that's kind of like your evidence. And then ultimately the takeaway lesson. One of the other most successful TED Talks, historically was the most successful TED Talk, I'm not sure if it still is a talk called How Schools Kill Creativity by Sir Ken Robinson. It's a brilliant TED Talk, and if you like the TED Talk, you can go on and read The Element and Finding Your Element, which are both brilliant books. Unfortunately, it's the late Sir Ken Robinson. He passed away a couple of years ago. But one of the brilliant things, I love this talk. He tells the story of how a child is sitting at the back of the class, and it's a child that's not really normally engaged in lessons, and yet in this particular lesson, she's scribbling away avidly, and the teacher comes up to her and says, what are you doing in this part of this particular part of the lesson? She says, sure, I'm drawing God. And the teacher says, well, nobody knows what God looks like. And this little child looks up and says, well, you will in a minute. And it's just brilliant, the simplicity and the innocence of that. But honestly, this TED Talk is what it is. It's a really impactful TED Talk, but it's built around humor. You cannot watch this TED Talk without laughing your way through it. So if you can bring humor into your stories too, you will have a much greater impact, as Sir Ken Robinson has demonstrated. What you also want to do when you're bringing, when you're telling stories or thinking about the stories that you should tell, is think about the impact that those stories, or how you can make a greater impact on your listener. One of the best examples I can give you of that is Bill Gates. So Bill Gates, when he was telling, he was doing a talk. Can't remember whether, I think it was his TED Talk, or one of his TED Talks. He's actually done more than one. He wanted to talk about the charitable work he was doing around malaria, but he wanted to make an impact. He wanted to have people resonating with what he was talking about, but he also wanted to create an emotional change. So what did he do? I don't know if anyone's seen this TED Talk, but he basically says that he wants to get the audience really kind of thinking on a personal level what it's like for the people living in Africa that have to deal with malaria. And he has this big glass jar, and he just lifts the top off and goes, basically, I've just released several mosquitoes into the audience, just so that you've got a small awareness of what it's like living in Africa with it. And of course, if you're sitting in the audience watching that TED Talk, and suddenly you're now aware of some mozzies going around the room, there might not have even been mozzies in the jar, but instantly he had an impact on the people that were listening to him. So we've got to think about, when we're thinking about stories, we've got to think about how can we create an impact on our listener. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to trigger people's emotions. So there was a store in somewhere in the US, I can't remember exactly where, and it was a very popular local store, and there was a big flood, and the store was completely trashed, and the owner of the store thought, well, that's it, the business is gone, there's no chance that I can recover what we've the damage that's been done here. I'm going to have to wind the business up. But this store was very much valued by its local community, and a team of 30 plus people descended on the store to basically, as a team, work completely for free to get that store back up and running. And it was a demonstration of how valued that store was in the local community. Well, that store was the first Whole Foods, what the business that's now owned by Amazon and is a global supermarket was that exact store. That was Whole Foods. And the reason that Whole Foods tell that story repeatedly throughout their business marketing process is because of the emotion that it helps people generate towards that business. The risk of the family business going out of business, going bust, and the community coming together to get it back up and running is the emotion that they're trying to generate with that storytelling, and it then therefore gets their audience buying into what they do. Now, one of the things that we can, I'm just going to see if this will play. Here we go. Let it play before I explain that.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry. In 2001, we introduced the first iPod. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music, it changed the entire music industry.
Oh.
Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device.
Sorry, I'm trying to get you guys back so I can see you as well, but I'm kind of working out why.
And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
So I wanted to share that with you for a few reasons. The primary reason is the power of 3. So one of the things that we want to think about when we're telling stories is the principle of power of 3. I'm sure you've heard politicians use the power of 3, but you end up with, people consistently give you information in 3 chunks, as we just saw with Steve Jobs there. He gave us the iPhone. He announced the iPhone as 3 separate products, but are you getting it? It's one product. If we can think about our stories in 3, or when we're telling our story, breaking things down into 3, the research shows that we are much better at receiving information in chunks of 3. So whatever we're doing, and I'm going to come back to this in terms of the acts of the story in due course further down the line. But one of the things we really want to be thinking about with stories is that we've got to be breaking it down into 3, but also what Steve Jobs did amazingly well there was he created surprise. So we thought he was releasing 3 different products, but actually it then dawns on you that he's only releasing 1 product, and it does 3 different things. So if we can, when we're telling stories, if we can create intrigue and surprise and have people thinking, then also that is a much more powerful way to deliver the story. So when we're creating these stories, we really want to be thinking about, okay, how can I create intrigue? How can I create surprise? One of the next things I think is important is to think about the message within the stories that we tell. So when I was at the conference in Nashville a couple of weeks ago, we had a speaker talk about her homeless to Harvard journey. And they've actually made an Amazon Prime movie based on her story of going from homeless to Harvard. But ultimately, what the message that she told us within her story was that you don't have to stay stuck. You may find yourself stuck in certain areas, but it's small doors that lead to big opportunities. So when we understand the stories that are important to us, it's then really important that we look for the message within, and because that is the most powerful way to sell whatever it is we're selling. We can tell the story that we are engaged with, but we then look for the hidden message within that can deliver those emotions, and those emotions that lead to action on behalf of from our clients. And ultimately, one of the things that is essentially doing is it's engaging the heart, not the head. We make decisions with our heart. We then justify them with our head. So if we find the right story and we can get our clients, customers, team buying into it with our heart, they will make the decision that we're hoping that they will make. One of the things that Richard Branson does or did right at the start of his business was, when he was launching his magazine, which was the first of his obviously many businesses, what he would do is he would phone up and because he didn't have any money when he was launching it, he would phone up and ask if he could reverse the charges. And he knew that basically bought him 5 minutes. So he had 5 minutes to make his pitch before essentially he would be cut off. And what he said when he would describe this later on, in years later on, he said, if you can't fit your message or your story on the back of an envelope, it's rubbish. So we've heard of, original business plans being on the back of napkins. We've got to try and work hard to compact it down to deliver it in a memorable but impactful way. I think I can't remember the famous quote, but it goes something along the lines of, "I'm sorry I didn't work hard enough to simplify it more." It takes effort to simplify the work that we do because we understand the complexities in what it is that we do. But the harder we work to simplify it for our audience, the more impactful it will be. So one of the other types of stories that we need to be able to tell, and I actually referred to this earlier on when I was talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger, is we need to tell stories. We want to tell stories that big us up. Of course we do, and we're going to come to the most important story that bigs us up later on. But you also want to be able to tell stories that make us look humble, make us look fallible, make us look vulnerable. So one of the stories I share in Entrepreneurial Happiness is around the birth of my second child. So my first child, Fion, was born through emergency C-section. So for want of a better phrase, we didn't get into the real nuts and bolts of traditional childbirth with Fion. So when it came to our second child, and we weren't going down the C-section route, it all got a little bit too graphic for me, and I came over very queasy and very faint. And instead of standing and supporting Carol through the childbirth process, I had to sit down because otherwise I might have fallen down. And so, obviously, the labor went on quite a long time. So I'm sitting there, kind of next to Carol's knees, and our child is born, and they hold the child up and say, "You want to announce the sex of the child?" And I look up, see everything that I need to see, all the evidence I need to see, and say, "We have a boy." The midwife whisks said boy off to weighing scales, wraps them up, pops them on Carol for that sort of baby to mum time and skin touch. I can remember the terminology that you used for that. And we announced that we are calling our son Ewan. And it's only about 20 minutes later. And by the way, so then I get on the phone, I phone my parents, my in-laws, my mother-in-law was already there, but I phoned my father-in-law, say we've got a baby boy, we've called him Ewan, it's all very exciting. About 20 minutes later, they take baby Ewan off to, actually, sorry, so we hadn't been weighed at this point, take baby Ewan off to weigh him. And the midwife says, I think we made a mistake here. This is not a boy, but a girl. So fortunately, what then became known as Bronwyn was born at 6 o'clock in the morning, because if Bronwyn had been born at sort of midday, I don't think I'd have been able to get through to my mum to tell her the amended news for about 6 hours, at which point the whole of Rutland and the whole of the Reading and the Marks family would have been aware of my error. But fortunately, she was born at 6 o'clock in the morning. I did get back in contact, and we didn't have a boy, Ewan. We had the daughter Bronwyn. So, but for the first 20 minutes of Bronwyn's life, she was known as Ewan, which is kind of weird, because actually we were never quite keen and settled on the boys' names, but we knew exactly what we were calling her if it was a girl. The reason I put this story in the book, in Entrepreneurial Happiness, is because it's got the message within it that I wanted to have it within it at the time, which is essentially, our eyes often deceive us. I was absolutely sure I'd seen all the evidence I needed for Bronwyn to be a boy, but apparently I hadn't. And perhaps it was the umbilical cord, perhaps it was my kind of desire to have a boy at the time, perhaps it was the dizzy haze that had come across me from going all weak at the knees. But whatever it is, but the part of the reason I shared that story and the message within it is because it's one of the stories that makes me look stupid. Actually, it makes me look certainly when you're writing a book, you're trying to big yourself up plenty, but actually it's also useful to find stories that humble you. Obviously, you don't want stories that make you look unprofessional, but stories that you like to tell are also powerful stories to include. And it's amazing what you can do with a story. So one of the speakers I saw in Boston, sorry, not in Boston, in Nashville, he did a 40-minute talk on how Disney had taken making apple pancakes for his what's the term? I can't remember. Basically, his son had very specific nutritional needs, and they ended up making apple pancakes, which was his favorite dish, but with all of the correct ingredients. And he did a 40-minute talk that was based around this whole principle of Disney making apple pancakes. But ultimately, if you want to do, you that's the power of getting a good story, is that you can build the whole talk around one story if you do it right. But one of the other talks that I saw in Nashville was by a company called Zipline. Now, Zipline make these amazing autonomous planes that deliver medicine around Africa. So they're whizzing off from one central depot. Well, there's a number of central depots around Africa, but they're delivering medicine and blood sample and blood donations to they've massively, like by a factor of 100, increased the distribution in Africa of medicine, of vital medicines and supplies of blood. But the guy specifically pointed out that him telling that he told the story of one family and the impact of their Zipline had. Now it's done 650,000 deliveries, but one story is far more impactful than the kind of story of all of the 650,000. You've probably seen this principle when you're asking for if you're ever asking for donation or noticing kind of charities asking for sponsorship. It's much more powerful if you see the story of one African child that is struggling, as opposed to seeing, being told that there's hundreds of thousands of African children struggling. So you really want to focus in on that one story, as opposed to sharing the much bigger success or problem but that has less impact. And I've told you this. I'm not going to go through the research of Dr. Joseph Zeimler again, because I've told you it before. But essentially, Dr. Joseph Zeimler as research concluded that actually retiring early was bad for our health. Your life expectancy reduces if you retire early, despite the fact that we crave early retirement. But what you want is a story that backs up any of the products that you have as well. So the reason I use this story quite often is because it was that research that prompted me to write The Dream Retirement, because it was kind of the click that was, okay, the Dream Retirement isn't just about the money. It's also about how we spend our time and how we improve our well-being as well. So having a story that relates to each product. So every time I was on the radio or on the TV or on, being interviewed by somebody or being asked by a client, why did you write the book? I go back to that story of Dr. Joseph Zeimler's research. So and every book has its own story, because it's the story that allows me to explain why I wrote The Dream Retirement. And obviously, why I want to explain about The Dream Retirement is because if it's, let's say it's on the radio, I want them to download that book, because that's falling into my, they're then falling into our marketing sequence. One of the most important stories that we need to get people to tell is our clients. So I can't remember whether this video clicks. I'm just going to play you I think the short version of a testimonial video that we got a client to do.
And I really needed someone to come in and have a good look at my complete portfolio and decide on what the best strategy was going to be in the future. I found the whole experience extremely easy, but the whole thing was fantastically easy. The staff here were a joy, very, very friendly. I almost wish that I'd started it earlier on and I'd had someone like Charlie perhaps with me for the last 20 years, because someone could have advised me about investing the school fees and so on. I've done it very much in my own way, and I might be even better off today had I had someone been investing with someone like Charlie for the last 20 years rather than the last 7 or 8 years. But if someone's considering going to a financial advisor, do it. Really do it.
So one of the things that is really powerful in all of your marketing is having your clients telling the story of the benefits that they've received. And that was a very short version. The longer version of that same video is broken up into kind of different chunks. But ultimately what he did was he told you the story of, essentially where he was beforehand, how the process was, and how it was at the end of it. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get people to do. So that particular video, we used that one was around his retirement. So we would have that, if anyone was on the retirement section of our website, that video sitting on the right hand side, so that a prospective client could click on that and get, oh, hang on, this is what somebody else wanted, experienced as a result of going to see Efficient Portfolio on their retirement. And we would have different videos for each of the different categories of client that we wanted to deal with, what we classed as our ideal client. And so if you downloaded the 2-minute retirement plan, the next piece was, here's a story of a client that's benefited. They've been on that journey, because people buy into stories. People will watch. The most powerful part of our website was our client stories, because people want to see other people's stories and people's journeys. One of the other things that we can do is we can use stories as part of our customer service experience and explaining customer service. So essentially that's what we were doing with Jeremy, who we just saw in the video. Zappos, if you read Delivering Happiness, also talk about, they tell the story of how, whilst they're a shoe company, their customer service was so good that somebody could phone up at midnight and get their Zappos customer service agent to find them a delivery pizza. So that story got told by Tony Hsieh so many times, particularly in the book. But it's using those stories that can really sell the concept to your future customers. Michelle Mone tells the story of the PR stunt when she was launching Ultimo. I don't know if you've heard. So basically what she did was, the day that Ultimo bras were launched in Selfridges, she paid a load of people to go and dress up as surgeons and go and protest outside of Selfridges, basically pretending to be plastic surgeons, saying, you're going to do, but with these bras are so good, you're going to do us out of a job. But it's a brilliant story. I've seen her speak twice. She tells that exact same story every time. She created the story, she created the PR stunt, but ultimately it's that story that she's built her brand around. So I think let's break for lunch now, but after we get back from lunch, what I want you to do is I want you to try and think about the stories that you should be sharing and how you should be sharing them, because this is not just about having an impact on your future clients, it's also about having an impact on your team. Because one of the things that that I often used to realize was that, so I had my story on our web, on the Efficient Portfolio website, and when we employed a new team member, we would get them to watch that story, because ultimately what tends to happen is the bigger our business grows, the more the team see you as you are today, and they forget where you've come from. They or maybe not even aware of the stories that got you to where you are, and why you shaped this business. So it's really important that not only do we use stories to impact our future clients and our current clients, but also to impact our team. So